Welcome to Higher Intelligence, smart takes on AI for the next generation campus. I'm JC Bonilla, EdTech executive, data scientist, and educator. Every episode, we go through the noise and focus on what is actually changing in higher education because of artificial intelligence. Yes, AI in higher ed. And today, we're asking a question that doesn't get enough of airtime in the AI conversation, at least from me. About 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this is all I was doing in thinking of the intersection of AI and creativity. So yes, today's conversation, it's now how AI, it's replacing designers. That's not the question that matters. The most interesting question is what is happening to AI as it's shaping this new creative professional. Is there such a thing as an AI creative professional? Is there such a thing as staff augmentation around the creative work? I believe it's restructuring. I believe it's changing the ways of working. And as consumers of creative, brands, agencies, technology, we are benefiting from that. So how is this skill shaping? What does it mean for our industry, higher education? And ultimately, how does it translate into the enrollment pitch, into the retention analogy, and overall student storytelling? To do that, of course, if you know me, I'm going to go deep into my network of friends and professionals and bring in one of my favorite ones. My guest today is someone that I spent almost 30 years working with. And he has also been 30 years at the intersection of creative strategy, measuring outcomes in higher education. This one is going to be a good one. Why? Because my guest today is Michael McGetrick. Mike is the Vice President and Principal of Creative Interactive Services at Spark 451, one of the most respected higher ed agencies in the country. He co-founded Spark 451 in 2011, 2011, with some fellow new NYU friends, and has been building web, interaction design, creative strategy for colleges, universities ever since. Mike, welcome to the show. How you doing, my friend?
Doing really well, JC. Great to see you. Great to be with you. I've been loving the new format of the podcast. Once again, I'm a big fan of yours and big fan of this show. So I'll continue to follow it. And thanks for having me on. So I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Mike. Mike, what is this with McGetrick? It's on a deep research that I did on you. It came out, and I really love this nickname because it really tells me something essential that I know you do, right? Which is not only you do beautiful campaigns, but you're an expert, in my opinion, the best in the business at making campaigns that move the needle. Is this because you also teach? You also have this other pedigree that I love on, you've been at Disney Television and I think you've been teaching for 15 years at Brooklyn College. So what is McGetrick and how does it relate to the conversation maybe today?
Well, that of course, it means you dug into my creative profile on our spark51.com website. Our copy director, Colleen Bowen, has suggested that each of us suggest a nickname for ourselves that would go with our profile to make it a little more interesting. So, my name is McGetrick, last name, and, people have always called it the metric system, McGetrick system. And, being that I'm really into analytics and looking at creative outcomes, and campaign outcomes with specific analytic quantitative measurement, I figured I'd go with metric McGetrick because it's a moniker that's stuck with me through most of my life. But yeah, it really comes down to, things I hold dear and things that have, come through with my education and development through the years. I really started my career exclusively as a creative, working at agencies and producing campaigns and things like that. And then moving more specifically into higher education marketing, where it was a different type of work, very aspirational, something I really loved working on. But it was also amazing because you had direct access to the data. And as the years went by, we were able to do a better job of measuring both application outcomes, but also what were the inputs and original sources for the students that came to the funnel, and the kind of outcomes they had on the outside, and even the success rates they had at graduation. So it's a great field where you can tie all these pieces and interests together, and you have a great impact for both the institution and the students who your communications ultimately touch.
You are indeed, my friend, a hybrid, and things marketing performance, the best of how creative drives and how to measure it is being, anyone is in good hands if they have you in that conversation. Speaking of being in good hands, can we remind everybody what Spark 451 is? I think a lot of our listeners may have worked with you because you're probably the best in the business as an agency specializing in all things higher education or education, B2C, school to student or school to school, program to program. You've done it all. And also, from your point of view, there's a common denominator across our brands. The 451, Spark 451, Element 451. So tell us about Spark 451 and from your point of view, 451, what is all that?
Yeah, so Spark 451, simplest way I can put it, we're a higher education marketing agency. We help colleges and universities with their institutional challenges related to branding and identity, where they stand from a positioning standpoint, and also their enrollment challenges. How do they bring in a class year after year? With reasonable growth strategies and being able to invest wisely in those strategies. So, we have really great teams who can manage all levels of those challenges, and we bring those experts to bear for the work we do with our clients day after day. So it's a great place to be, and I appreciate all the clients we get to work with, and it's a fantastic industry that I continue to have great faith in that will have an amazing future, despite some short-term challenges we're hitting through various channels. Yes.
I don't know what you're talking about. What about 451? I'm looking forward to see how you frame this. What is the 451?
Well, first
your
of
take
all,
on 451.
Well, when we first started Spark 451, we we're looking for a name, and I loved combining two things together. So Spark is all about creativity, energy. 451, nod to Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, the temperature at which paper burns, and so hot ideas, but also a transformation point from paper to digital. Of course, there's a very interesting connection between Spark 451 and Element 451. The founders of Element 451 began their work within Spark 451's walls, building in-house tools and an incredible platform that was growing so successfully and so fast it had to be spun out into its own company. So, Artist Canoe, your very dear friend, started here, and the success and what's become of Element 451 is amazing. And the two companies remain close partners and close friends. We call it the 451 family. We are completely independent from each other, but still connected and close.
Everybody, Element was incubated within Spark 451's ecosystem, and a lot of the shape that we have today in our core competencies in enrollment management really stem from the work that Mike and Steve and all the awesome, fantastic talent and work that Spark 451 does. Mike, let's dive into our conversation today. I want to frame this, and throughout this conversation, we're probably going to have the opportunity to dwell more on how Spark does the work, the connection of Spark and Element as well. But this is a really important conversation. And as I said at the outset, it feels that we're not talking enough about it. There's a lot of incredible things that happen on the AI front and agents, the claim of productivity, doing things faster and more efficiency, but how is it translated into creative? It's a really important viewpoint. So let me start with the stat. 70% of creators say AI is improving their efficiency. 74%, while also empowering them to explore creative pursuits they might have not attempted otherwise. So that tracks with every other profession, finance, accounting, engineering, and whatnot. But now the data is more nuanced than that. So from Adobe and their own survey, we're starting to see very interesting wins that are affecting parts of the house. That efficiency is the easy part. What does that mean? The hard part is what happens when the creative quality is now not how fast you do it. Where brand authenticity is still the thing that, AI maybe doesn't crush, right? But just because I did it at a tenth of the cost, that doesn't mean that I hit all the brand pillars. And the distinctiveness of the schools that you do work for, like campuses and universities, doesn't really come from good old prompting, right? In the same directions, it requires that human in the loop, on the loop. We can talk about that. So AI creative tools are the other thing that has emerged. Point number one, just because we're going faster, that doesn't mean that the creative output, it's becoming better. It still requires some of that je ne sais quoi that makes creative quality, brand authenticity, and distinctiveness. But then the tools are generally extraordinary. And we're going to be talking a lot about creative tools today. From my point of view, and I'd like to hear your perspective today as we go through this news, it's changing the profession. Circa, I guess, 1960s, when drafting became available through computerized, solutions, AutoCAD and whatnot, it changed the profession of drafting. And then it started moving into kind of digital imaging and whatnot. Today, we'll be talking about the studio, the solo studio, cinematic production, Hollywood-like, that now is accessible to all. Good, bad, I don't know. And last but not least, before I go into the first story, the question for higher education for all our partners is not, can we use AI to make content faster, right? It's actually, how can this capability in AI is making my brand better and relevant and pursue the outcomes that are carrying in the communication and the marketing efforts that we need to do. So to start our story, let's go to Adobe. Adobe Firefly goes to unlimited. Adobe restructure its Creative Cloud suite, probably something that you operate and you used. Mike, you're probably an expert on these tools. I don't work with them. So please make it real for us. What does this mean? Adobe isn't just a stop on models. Like, I get better models. It's like trying to integrate these third-party engines, Runway, Flux, Google models into its creative suite. So this is changing how QuickCut, now where AI will take raw footage, and then kind of take it next level. You can prompt your way to it. In other words, Mike, it feels that if vibe coding is a thing where I can interact with these tools to produce output, I can vibe creative now, and teams can ideate, generate, and iterate together. Now, great. And as I turn to you, this sounds like for me like a philosophical shift, right? It's not only features, right? But the creative tools, the creative directors need to start thinking differently. For higher education, what does this mean? No production bottlenecks. Timelines is no longer the issue. The creative process maybe now goes faster. You don't have to spend as much time in asset management. You charged me a lot many years ago on asset management, and I understood why. But now is that different? With time compressions, what does it do to the cost? What does it do to the creative and the outcome? So Mike, you know the Adobe ecosystem, and you probably used it your entire career. When you saw this announcement, like, what's your reaction? And real, like, how did it shape what you do at Spark 51 with creative teams and all the work that you do?
Sure. So interesting article, and what Adobe's doing in AI. A lot of people have not liked what they've been doing. What they, in terms of their AI approach, they've been doing what they call ethical model training.
Ethical model training. What is that?
Yes. So they've been training their AI models exclusively on content that they own and have access to and that they've licensed. So Adobe has their stock library. Adobe has, relationships with Shutterstock and others, and they have agreements to train on their libraries.
You cannot use that picture. You have to generate the assets or go into a third-party agreement to use licenses, assets, all that kind of good stuff. Which, by the way, the whole IP and AI thing, it's not been solved. So not taking away from your narrative, but that's such an interesting point, right? So as this technology is pushing, there's this other monster of like what happens to those rights and whatnot. Sorry, I probably disrupted your flow. Keep on going.
So the result of that training has been that they can produce an authentic, stamp on the source and origin of their artificial intelligence images. But in the profession, it's considered that they have one of the lowest quality image models going. Their Adobe Firefly model, which, has gotten better from 3 to 4 to 5. But based on how it's trained, it's trained on stock imagery. And we all can kind of identify stock imagery through our, being in the world today. So a lot of people have really not liked their models. So this strategy of allowing them to extend to third-party models like Flux and now Banana from Google, GPT image, that has allowed them to extend the capabilities of their models in Adobe Firefly. So let's talk about some other things they've introduced that are relevant to our workflow. They've introduced something called boards. Boards is a collaborative area where you can have multiple designers building out imagery and laying things out. So when we typically approach a project, we're going to do something called a mood board, where we are bringing together source imagery, inspiration, if you will, for the project at hand. Let's say it's a whole university website that we want to have a creative concept for. So these boards allow us to, whereas in the past you might source stock imagery, source imagery, and say this is the creative direction, inspiration we're going for. We can now use Adobe Firefly and third-party models to generate that brainstorming imagery. So a really efficient, collaborative way of using AI. You can, bring in source images, say, give me something similar, give me variations on this. And so it's a really fast way of creative teams to both collaborate together as teams, but also use the AI tools together and produce something that's going to, get to a better product faster. You've mentioned a few things in terms of like a workflow. Efficiency is where AI has been, it's delivered its greatest results initially, like the same way that it does for coding, the way of, generating images, being able to categorize images, use machine learning to identify objects in images, allow us to build libraries that we can search. And we're building out, the incredible need for speed and asset creation for the tons of channels and campaigns that we have to produce assets for, necessitates that type of speed. So using AI tools, really helps us to be more efficient there. Where I think it has its, best delivery for us and delivers the best value overall is just allowing for greater creative exploration, right?
What does creative exploration mean to you nowadays on the AI realm? I've seen the process of creative exploration without AI, specifically as we supported Fortune 500 brands on my days at Vayner, and it's a very human process. Do you know what I mean, right? So ideation, whiteboarding, inspiration, it's an accordion. So sometimes you stretch and you go deep and you keep on going, and then that refinement of ideas comes in. On really lucky days, the creative idea starts on day 0. So if you know it, you just kind of have the inspiration, because I guess what I'm trying to say is there's 2 processes. We didn't have the creative inspiration, so you do this process and it kind of gets shaped and you don't even know where it came from, but it kind of has everyone's fingerprints. Or you know it, you believe it, you see it as a creative director or someone has the idea, and then you kind of, break it apart until it's perfected. Maybe I'm being too naive on how the creative process and discovery takes place, but how is it different in AI now?
Well, let's start where you began, the origin, right? When you're working with a college or university, you're looking for some strategic differentiation, right? To say, what does this institution uniquely stand for? And how can I differentiate them from the many, many, many other college and universities out there? So when we start with that idea in mind, you mentioned everyone has access to the same models. So, when these tools become universal, differentiation becomes the thing you're looking for, right? So when you're embarking on a campaign, you're looking for getting to that ultimate finished product. And creatives think laterally, right? Laterally mean you're jumping from spot to spot. And in the past, that lateral jumping would require a lot of, let's say, manual work, a lot of manual comping, drawing, writing, all these things coming together. AI, with its ability to prototype for you without having to, let's say, go get a bunch of cameras, go get a bunch of filming done. You can prototype the creative output prior to getting into the expense of production. So, for example, in a shoot a film for a college, being able to cop up a storyboard for how that's going to play out and the type of shots you're going to need and the type of words that people are going to say, all that becomes very, very efficient. What would take, an illustrator days to do now can, come down to hours. And, if you let the tools do all the work, sometimes minutes, and accepting their output. But, there's some trade-off there that, where you want to have your input. I like to tell my creative people that ultimately I just want us to have control of the AI's output. So that requires you to understand, what inputs lead to that. So what are the dimensions of your prompt, what we call the prompt stack, and let's make sure that we're controlling the AI and it's not controlling us.
Love that. Let's use the opportunity to switch to our next story, because we've been talking about the tools, but as we're talking about tools, the process is changing, right? And it's changing dramatically. And that's in a way what you and I are just talking about. So I want to talk to the idea of process through the lens of what I'm calling the cinematic singularity, right? AI video is now so good that is indistinguishable. Like, I cannot tell the difference between a film or AI produced video, right? So you were saying before, stock pictures and images and assets, they look stocked. And now there's a new threshold that we're starting to see, right? With Sora 2 and Google Veo 3 and AI generated video, quality, it's impressive. This is not pretty good AI. This is literally Hollywood kind of AI. So what's the news? Recently, we started, since 2005, so over a year of trading, stock footage revenue, we're talking about Getty's, Shutterrocks, these licensings that you described, down 60%. Like 60% of their revenue or stock prices have dropped significantly. Why? Because you just explained it. You don't go there anymore, and maybe you can do your ideation. Your briefs are inspired by AI-powered controllable prompts or your prompt stack, right? So the licensing model built on humans and that kind of human capture footage is being repriced in real time. Here's the flip. The flip side is that we're not talking about is, so does that mean that I, the individual, can do it all? AKA the solo studio. So that's the part that I want to push you to think about. Is it so good? Then can I do it solo? So is the solo studio a thing? Individual creators or small teams are producing content that previously required $500,000 of cost with a crew of 50, right? And I could probably achieve that. In our segment, that meant R1 resourcing. That meant that flagship universities had the video teams and the quality of productions, where small institutions, we had students with vertical phones doing campus tours, raw and intimate. So the community college in rural Kentucky now has access to the same production capabilities that a Big Ten university could have. Democratization is real. Mike, where do you see this? So democratization, cinematic quality now is accessible. Production costs are disappearing. Maybe a solo studio. You've been doing graphics for Disney Studio. You know what's real. You've done hundreds of productions for universities. So where does this moment rank, and how do you specifically see Spark and your teams approaching this campus video production story that I just mentioned?
Sure. So look, what those video models can do is amazing. Sora, all the others. It's just amazing and fantastic. It does level the playing field somewhat, but higher education is in a unique position in the sense that they have to be authentic. If you watched, let's say, College Game Day on Saturdays during college football season and then stayed on to watch some of the football games, you'd see that every school gets the opportunity to show a television commercial about their school. So University of Georgia, Alabama, you name them, Notre Dame. And you would see these commercials and not a single one has an AI-based shot in it, most likely. It's all authentic footage from their campuses and authentic imagery. And colleges need to continue to be that. There's an expectation from all of their audiences that the college will present something real. So again, I think that there's incredible contributions from AI here when it comes to consumer product advertising, commercial film production, extra shots, extra layers for compositing when creating special effects. But the actual finished product for college universities are always going to have to be authentically produced from something live happening on campus, or of course something, if it's online, that's another story, of course, but got to be authentic.
When I think about authenticity, right, there's something about overacting. There's something about how we introduce stories that are not authentic. The production being authentic sounds very different now. It sounds that you're managing two levels of authenticity, right? One of the best ways to think about authentic content in the realm of social media is when you have very raw footage that, influencers do on a brand. That's called authentic content. But I think you just position something that is different here. So tell me if I'm getting this correctly. It's not also the output, but it's how. It's not the what, it's the how. That there's an aspect of authenticity that is that it will need the human interaction, and it's AI supported, but at the end of the day, authenticity is when the classical production touches the content. In other words, if there's something called AI slop, right? It seems that it could be on the creative side, so you need to do that, last mile type of thing. Is that right? Are you talking about is there two types of authenticities, and you're referring to this one that way? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think, look, institutions need positioning, they need message clarity, and they need to understand their audience, right? So small teams can produce the content, but strategy is what still matters. AI democratizes the production, but it doesn't democratize that level of insight that can come from a larger team, both within and outside the university. Building on that, you can definitely use AI for prototyping, for establishing and clarifying your vision. And then when it comes to actually building and, let's say literally photographing, shooting the finished product, I think reality is where you need to be.
Interesting. So I just said something very promising. Small community college in Kentucky, you can do R1, Big Ten type of productions, and where you're saying it's not so much. Their opportunities have expanded significantly, but this strategy to basically make this next level, it still needs to be resourced differently, and not all AI is going to get you there. Can I double click on authenticity, and then we can continue this kind of work stream and news reporting on there's a new way to produce, but authenticity has two components. I guess we just unpack that. So the third story that I want to unveil, and we'll put it all together, right? AI generated content in marketing, it's starting to become tricky to distinguish. Is it a deep fake or not, right? 50% of the customers today say they cannot tell whether an image is AI generated or not. I think that's actually underestimated. I literally at this point, I don't know if that cat who fought a tiger or saved the little baby from the bear, it's real or not. It's just incredible, right? And 80% of the brands believe that disclosure is important. That's not a niche sentiment. That's major, that's super majority in the audience saying, hey, you need disclosure. This is AI powered, right? So social media content gave us this idea of this is basically sponsored content or not. This type of vibe is starting to emerge. So with this backend research, the brands need to hide on AI in terms of production costs because it allows me to come out there. But to be truly authentic, it seems that I need to come and disclose. So maybe this concept is emerging to authenticity 3.0, where 1.0 for me is before social media, 2.0 with social media, and then kind of where we enter today. But the punchline for me is, what is the playbook then? Because you have production, real, story number 2, Authenticity demands from the user, from the consumer. Students want to know. And then in the middle is the brand and you guys. Is there a playbook here, Mike, on how you bring authentic student voices, real testimonies, real campus moments, real diversity, real, with the benefits of AI, and yet you guys need to come and produce it because the strategy and like the high quality doesn't come in. So how do you mesh all these things?
So, I look at a product like Element 451 as sort of a smart embodiment of AI knowledge about an institution, the way you guys have developed the knowledge base, right? And you are feeding into this single source, this model of knowledge about an institution, and creatives and communicators can tap into that knowledge to produce really authentic content about that institution, right? Based on reality, right? So truths. And you can scale that up. You can use Element 451 AI agents to actually ask questions of faculty members and have them answer questions, and that can become part of the knowledge base and add to its authenticity. So scaling up content production by having a centralized knowledge base is an authentic way to use AI to have great communications coming out of your institution. When it comes to marrying that content with marrying that written content with imagery, with motion, with video, that's where I think the line is drawn from the consumer and the receiver perspective, right? The audience perspective, where they're saying, hey, I'm used to disclosures on a sponsored ad, right? A sponsored post. The platforms have taken the stance to say, hey, we're going to disclose when this is sponsored, and they're going to penalize when people try to hide it. And so this same expectation, is going to be there for things that are, AI produced, right? That if it's portraying some kind of reality and it is in fact artificially generated, then that's where the disclosure has to take place. If it's some fantastical scene, then, for some type of product, we can take a pass there because we have certainly used 3D and CGI throughout, history to produce, to try to reproduce things. And we don't necessarily go and disclose that. But if we're portraying it as reality, we have to, disclose that.
Let me give you a scenario, Mike. Maybe not a fair question, but here we are. How would you react to the following, right? So, hey, Mike, I am the board of Spark for 51. So, we got to stay competitive, right? And it's very clear that the strategy, the last mile of production and marketing is where it's at. Companies in our schools need us. So from now on, every creative brief is going to be AI powered. And I want you to show up and say, hey, client, as we pitch, these 7 creative briefs are being AI powered because we're going to take that one and go all in. Is this a scalable formula? Is this too naive? Like in the trueness of AI work slop. So what I heard you say is there's all these inspirations and things like that. So I'm going to put it on the creative brief. So what's wrong with saying here are 7 creative briefs, AI powered with the, AI stamp authenticity certificate, right? So that we can hone into the last one and just take it home with what you guys do best. Strategy, marketing, communications, branding, all that kind of good stuff.
So very interesting question. I think that's, certainly a future possibility, right? Because when you say creative brief, right? In order to create a brief, you need to have input, you need to have insight, and then you can, the end result, the product is a written brief that will lay out things, right? In a formulaic way. Understanding the problem, understanding the audience, understanding the goal of the campaign. And so these are things that are somewhat formulaic, right? And it's a template, if you will. So provided that the input comes from people with insights and people who have, actual knowledge about the challenge at hand and knowledge about the market and knowledge about the competition, and have that context, provided that comes from them and the output comes from AI. I really don't have any particular problem with that. It's us controlling the output is where I'm always going to be, on the side of. So if it becomes an issue of us prompt stacking to get to the ideal creative brief, and that can get it done faster and provide more value to the client, then I'm on board with it.
I totally follow you. By the way, Mike, this showcases why I should not be running an agency and why you do it. But your point is well taken. The tools, they require the AI, right? The tools require these inputs, and the art of creative briefs is not only that AI can do it faster, but how do you ground your digital your knowledge source? How do you create these guardrails so that the output, whether it's a prompt stack or whatnot, the output is consistent with your creative direction and whatnot. Very interesting. I'm going to pivot to one last conversation under the lens of the solo studio. We've been talking about this. I think that the story that we're unpacking is the possibilities are immense. The augmentation of creative is taking place, but the creative process is still dominating, or there's agency of creative and AI co-developing. I want to appeal to your academic roots as an educator. I'd love to see how you're thinking about this, right? Because there's research, and this is my fourth news, and the last one from Adobe research team published February the 5th, this article that it's fascinating. The study found that students who regularly use AI creative tools show measurable improvements in academic performance, creative confidence, engagement across disciplines. It's just not in design programs, right? It's across disciplines. So if all of a sudden, I used to say in engineering school when I was kind of solving differential equations and things like that, it's like, what is the approach? And that requires not only mathematical thinking, it's kind of like creative thinking. So if this is what I mean with across disciplines. This is very interesting because creative confidence, engagement across disciplines, academic performance has multiple manifestations. The root cause, at least in this study, is that there's a correlation with AI creative tools usage. What do you think of this, my friend? As an educator, you teach in Brooklyn College. You've been doing this for a longer time, and you're watching your former students or current students enter the workforce. Are they better at now? Are you seeing them performing better in your class? Or are they missing something still? How is this story real in your own experience?
Yeah, well, you mentioned one of my passions is to continue to teach throughout my career. And as one of your earlier guests, Dean Paul Russo from Yeshiva mentioned, that adjuncts bring that passion. We don't do it for the money. So it's something I have a lot of fun doing. And so I have a lot of opinions on this matter. I think, creatives have a tendency to gatekeep, right? To say that, hey, there's creatives over here and then there's, other types of people over here. And certainly, that's something that AI, can erase somewhat. It takes away sort of the skills that were necessary to produce an image. And, I think when students have the ability to create something, it changes them and it gives them confidence that they can create something else and so on and so forth. You build on success. So the ability to use tools to articulate what's in their minds. I want students thinking and I want students doing, and that's how they learn. And these tools get them past the things that are holding them back from the doing piece when it comes to adding a beautiful infographic chart or an illustration that supports their thinking on a particular social science matter or something from their business class. So, all these things come together. If I'm giving advice to a 22-year-old, asking them to develop some taste by looking at things that they like around, I'm thinking about telling them to learn about storytelling, beginning, middle, end, and having judgment to, decide what is looking good and what fits. So just being able to discern what you're going to take away, right? When we have a presentation for a portfolio, when we're hiring a young person, we judge them not just by how good the portfolio is, but how bad some of it is, right? And if they included bad stuff, that's a sort of a sense that they're proud of that work, but they didn't have the judgment to take it away. So learn that judgment to give away some of your stuff. So AI generates lots of possibilities, but your career as a young person will depend on choosing the right possibility.
Oh, that was powerful, Mike. Last question. What is your advice to a leader of marketing, director of marketing, communications, a chief marketing officer, someone who's running a marketing team at an institution? They sit down with you today and they say, hey, I need to rebuild my creative strategy around AI. Where do I start? And what's the first thing that you would tell them?
So, I might suggest that CMO start with asking a few questions. The first is, of course, what story does your institution uniquely tell, right? So we need to be differentiated in higher education marketing clearly. Number two, look at that student journey. Are you serving your students well in the journey? Are they getting stuck anywhere? And can you use AI to help remove some friction from those moments in the journey? And from there, look to rebuild some creative workflows based on those answers. Experiment as much as you can with AI. I think AI is going to be ever present, and it's not a question of whether it's going to be used. Like Ty said on your previous episode, it's not a question of whether you should be using it. It's where can you use it? And then, really try to scale the clarity of narrative across your institution. And AI knowledge bases like the ones Element 451 can really help you scale that.
Mike, thank you so much. This is exactly the conversation I wanted to have. Thank you for bringing 30 years of experience, of hard-won experience on creative measurement strategy. This is an authentic conversation. There you go. I just plugged it in. Any parting thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I'll just say that I continue to love working in higher education. It's always been the place that's been about expanding human potential. And I think AI is just one of the newest tools for that mission. And the question isn't whether we're going to use it or not, but, how we use it in a thoughtful manner. So thank you for all you're doing with this podcast and spreading the love. So great to see you, JC.
As always, it's the pleasure. It's mine. Let's get together for coffee one of these days. Here's what I'm taking away from today. And again, Mike McGetrick, at Spark 451, ping him. He is the real deal. So AI didn't take creativity away from higher ed marketers. Not yet. But it's taking excuses away, right? Production excuses, maybe some budget excuses, time execution for sure. Some of these are gone or have disappeared significantly, right? What's left is the hardest thing: strategy, story, the brand judgment that a model cannot generate today, right? So if you're a creative, know that in a way, this is how you need to shape around, right? Strategy, story, the brand judgment. The question remains: who are we as an academic institution, and why should the student choose us? That remains, because the answer is that you are a unique academic institution, and the student needs to find out how and why. So if today's conversation changed how you're thinking about the creative process at your institution, share with someone, share this, give us comments, and we'd love to hear more about your experience. I'm JC Bonilla, and this is Higher Intelligence. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Higher Intelligence. This show is part of the Enrollify network, home to the largest collection of podcasts in higher education. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. You can find more podcasts, webinars, videos, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe to get new content sent directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the AI agent platform for higher education. Learn more at element451.com.